Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 29 team selection. This is a pretty crucial game week for a lot of managers, where I think the chip strategy piece of the season is really starting to set in. We obviously have had a lot of managers use the assistant manager chip previously, but this is the window where you start to lock in things like roughly where you plan to wildcard, where you plan to free hit, things like that, and even arguably, how to bench boost off of that strategy wise. I'm also seeing the emergence of the wildcard 29 strategy. I myself will not be pursuing it simply because I think my team isn't that bad for game week 29. And I think the pro of something like a wildcard 29, actually, it does remind me very much so of my wildcard 26 last season, in the sense that you can set your team up so that it kind of insulates itself from the kind of blank game week really well. You can, using the information that we have right now, take a pretty good guess as to how you can set your team up for the road ahead, particularly on the doubles, but more specifically also over something that we have confirmed, right? Not the doubles in Game Week 33 and the blanks in 34 that are up in the air based on FA Cup results, but specifically the Newcastle and Crystal Palace double, where you already know that you would like to carry certain players or save certain transfers. And I think with the change this season, it's even actually bolstered a strategy like this, because if you've been carrying, let's say, a lot of free transfers heading towards this game week here, knowing that it's a blank, and you suddenly actually decide to wildcard instead, you could, in theory, carry 3 to 4 to 5 transfers when we have the double on 32, and that should give you more than enough to get the amount of Newcastle and Crystal Palace players that you want. And you can also then reassess whether you want to use the free hit on 33 or 34, although you kind of have to make those decisions now with your wildcard. E.g., if you go for Haaland now, it kind of suggests that you're going for a 3 at 34 strategy. If you're going for a pretty safe draft, I would say, where you keep, let's say, someone like Mo Salah, it's probably because you're actually planning for the opposite of that. You're maybe planning for something like a 3 at 33, where you care less about the doubles in 33. You're still targeting 32, but you're also kind of looking at the inverse of that, just making sure that you have a strong team for 34 and the road ahead in and out of Game Week 33. So I think there's a lot of chip strategy aspects that need to be concluded this week. I myself have decided upon a wildcard 31. As you guys know, transfer plans are very much similar, but the added impact, just having a look at, let's say, the state of my team from the previous week, as you can see, I ended up having a pretty poor week overall. Once again, went for maximum risk, I would say, going for the Palmer captaincy over Salah. Was it supposed to be such a bad swing? I don't think so, but I did know that Salah was the best captain, and I was just hoping for a little bit of luck to go my way in terms of picking someone who actually had a great game himself, really good underlying data heading towards that game, clearly poor form, but also a case where, as I always say, very hard to predict where form ends or where form begins. And so I wanted to take that sort of risk with Palmer. It's now set me further back, and I have a lot of chasing up to do, and a lot of it will have to come down to probably taking additional risks at this stage of the season to try and secure the ultimate rank goal that I have, which is to finish either in the top 10k, which is, I think, still possible. I've jumped within 3 or 4 game weeks straight to moving from, let's say, 15k to top 500 in the world. I did that last season, close to the end. And now I think with a rank of 186,000, it's probably unlikely that I'm going to get the top 500 again. Very, very unlikely, of course. But actually, I think there's a possibility to still finish within the top 10k. And I think that's still within reach, but just not going to have that sort of expectation. I just want to finish in the top 100k now. And we're just going to try make consistently good moves on a data perspective, but actually still take, I think, a sizable amount of risk as I try to be a bit more ambitious, as I said, based on that sort of former rank goal of top 10k, as I have done in the previous 2 years. So in terms of the team, we know that Trent is injured. He's out of the Carabao Cup final. Alisson's fine. Munoz is clearly blanking. Gabriel is fine. He did play in the Champions League match, which allowed Saliba to rest. I don't think that has a really significant impact. He will go to Brazil for international duty, and I suppose the only fear is if someone like Kiwior could potentially start a match like Game Week 30. I would really hope that that doesn't happen, but I think for the most part, Gabriel has been an absolute brick wall this season in terms of minutes, and hopefully that remains the case. With Trent, as I said, going back to him and his injury, it seems like you've got effectively 3 weeks until Liverpool play again. They're going to play on the 2nd of April. They would have played in the Cup final, and we probably will get a press conference as well before Game Week 29 to confirm the extent of Trent's injury. But it does seem like the initial sort of news forecast isn't great. And I also think, look, regardless of what his recovery process is like in Game Week 30, it's extremely unlikely that he will actually play good minutes in that match in Game Week 30, because you're coming back from an injury. I've seen that Slot doesn't tend to, I think, overrush players coming back. He tends to give quite few minutes. Bradley is also injured, so that will have to be something that we track. But I think that Trent's minutes are not looking good for Game Week 30, and so he becomes an easier sell than even someone like Lewis Hall, as I plan to kind of dead end around Game Week 31. As far as the rest of the team, I mean, Salah is once again going to be a make or break to the rest of my season. Clearly going against him so far hasn't worked out, but I don't think the swing in terms of just looking at odds data has culminated in me thinking otherwise about Salah. I think I've always held him as the best player in the league, but in reality, he's going to have less fixtures than the rest of the field. And I will be trying to do things like making an optimal bench boost for Game Week 33 or 32, depending on how my strategy finalizes. I would say based on the FA Cup results. Things like, for example, whether Crystal Palace and Arsenal will double, that sort of thing. And obviously all the other teams included that will have pretty good odds of having doubles, and of course any potential fixture news that could be a complete surprise, as we've already, I think, been hit with twice this season already, particularly with the Newcastle and Crystal Palace one. So when I look at that, I do think that most free at 34 strategies going towards the end of the season with a wild card in mind very, very shortly will not have Salah in those drafts. Whereas if you go for a 3 at 33 strategy, I think it makes it a lot easier to carry Salah in those drafts. The reason why I say this is because if you're planning to have a team that's very robust and trying to maximize around doublers, it's very hard to see yourself affording someone like Salah. You're going to put a lot of money into players like Isak, Haaland, some of the City midfielders, players like Watkins, and it does make it very hard to, I think, justify keeping Salah on the team, especially since you're unlikely to captain Salah as much as you probably have been so far. Whereas if you go for a 3 at 33 strategy, you don't care about that. You will actually just get the doublers when you need to on the free hit. And for most game weeks in and out of the 33, you probably will captain Salah, as he has been just absolutely amazing this season. And I don't think anything's going to stop that. Another thing to mention in terms of the minutes coming out of their Champions League knockout, I don't think that's really changed much. When you look at the match logs for Salah this season in terms of his minutes, even when he's had, let's say, 3 matches in 9 days, 7 days, 8 days, that sort of thing, where you clearly have midweek games, Salah has been close to perfect with regards to minutes. And I don't see that changing. I don't see it as suddenly I'm a lot more scared about going against Salah. I simply will be going against Salah if I plan to wildcard with the 3 at 34 strategy in mind. And that's my ultimate thoughts on him. On Trossard, it was nice to see him rested within the Champions League. It probably means really good minutes for 29. I can't see Saka getting good minutes in 30. I also think Martinelli probably is, still struggling to build match fitness. I can't see his minutes being too much of an impact to Trossard, maybe more so on players like Ranieri and Marino. And hopefully Trossard will just maintain his minutes on 30, and then I can reevaluate going forwards. With Mbumo, he's just a staple in the team. Nothing particular, as I would also say that Brentford's fixtures for the next 3 to 4 or even 5 game weeks really are really, really poor. Up until really they play Man United in game week 35, I actually think they have one of the worst runs in the league entirely as a team. And of course, we know that Brentford have matched up really well versus teams, and Mbumo has been a huge talisman in certain games, but I'm not expecting a lot from him. I'm just happy to own him. As far as the forward players, João Pedro, in my opinion, has really reassumed himself within the team. As I mentioned in the transfer plans video, I think the cheat sheet series, which you can definitely have a look at for this game week in 29, which also has a free hit segment if anyone's curious. But the point on João Pedro, I think, is he has come back to being that sort of talismanic player in terms of minutes, but things can also change very quickly, and we know that has rapidly changed in the season. We also know that Brighton have really good depth and 2 other players who can actually, at any point in time, I would say bench João Pedro. What is nice, though, I think, is when you look at the fixtures for the Brazilian international duty games that he probably will be a part of, he'll come back quite late, quite jet-lagged, probably impacted by the schedule, and the first game that they have is going to be that FA Cup match versus Nottingham Forest, and the way I see it, it's more likely that João Pedro actually misses that game, because I've looked at, for example, when Fabian Herzog tends to rotate players from international breaks. For someone like João Pedro who comes back so late, it's probably likely that he misses minutes on that specific match or comes on as a substitute and then plays in Game Week 30 versus Aston Villa at home, which is a great game. And that actually has changed my plans a lot, because the sort of rise in João Pedro's minutes and re-prominence, I suppose, within the game just means that I don't really want to sell him on Game Week 29. On the flip side, we've got Dango, who's basically absolutely in the toilet, but he could potentially play in Game Week 30, and that kind of leaves my mind open to, okay, he's not actually so bad to keep for the purpose of maybe being able to play him Game Week 30 as well. With Isak and Beto, it's a case where both players are fantastic. Beto has a really good fixture here in Game Week 29, so it makes it very hard to sell him. I won't. Whereas with Isak, it's a case of transfer value and team value and what that means for my team itself. I do think actually I'm happy having looked at some of the potential fixture scenarios when the doubles fall, or what the potential 3-hit 33, 34 type teams on the wildcard 31 would look like. I don't think I really need to carry that much team value. I'm really struggling to find good transfers for myself that maintain the team value for whatever reason, and also don't hamstring my team for Gameweek 29 and 30, where I actually really want to kind of chase continuous upside with players like Holland being a great captaincy for Gameweek 30, and a good opportunity to get risk against someone like Mo Salah, whilst not, fielding an absolutely terrible FPL team to go against him. So I like the idea of potentially selling Isak this week and actually buying him back, and I'll sort of show that within my transfer plans after I show my Game Week 29 team effectively. So that's kind of where my thoughts lie with Isak, because the fixture just still is so good in Game Week 30, Brentford at home. And then after that 31, he'll be on my wildcard team, but I'll not have the same sort of team value placed around him. With players like, let's say, Beto, I think this is the last week where he's relevant. He's obviously going to be a great bench option, because as long as players like Calvert-Lewin and Broja are not going to be fit, his minutes will maintain really good, but the fixtures are just poor. So he's one of those players who's going to plug a gap for a lot of teams, maybe even wildcard teams, just simply because he's so cheap and so available. Whereas when you look at, let's say, the midfield, we're now struggling for cheap options, especially since Toneri's minutes have gone down. With Castagna, I'm just hoping to play him for Game Week 29 and hopefully not to see him again. And Flecken, same thing here as well. Although I'm very fond of Flecken, so that's that. Let's move on quickly towards my team selection for this week. And for this week, we're actually going to use some of the market odds from Rob T. As ever, I tend to look at multiple sources of data for projections on games, on teams, on predicted goals, on predicted goal scoring, and sort of assist odds. But we're using Rob T this week. You can find him at RobTFPL on X. He also is on Blue Sky if you're curious about that. But generally speaking, this week, it's a really good fixture, as we know, for teams like Bournemouth, City. I would say on a week like this, because simply there's not electric fixtures, and some of the best teams in the league are not featuring, right, with Newcastle and Liverpool and even Villa to an extent. The projected goals aren't particularly high. However, the clean sheet odds are still there and still pretty relevant for certain teams. Arsenal, Everton tend to stick out. So do Nottingham Forest as well, and United as well, which I think is more so a team that's relevant towards free hitters, or for people who have the kind of capacity to move into someone like Bruno this week, as he's such a strong and stable pick. Outside of that, I don't think there's anything that I'd like to call out for. Maybe another thought that I can just put into the ether is that the City projected numbers aren't actually very, very good, right, in terms of the market clean sheet percentages. And I think that the part of this is because Brighton have been on an absolute tear recently. So it kind of does reduce, I suppose, a lot of people's inclination to go towards Haaland and to dedicate themselves towards him. I really do think part of that is, if you go for City players, you know that you're probably planning a wildcard 31, because they're so well suited towards that dead end on 30. Whereas if you're just looking purely at this game week, we actually have some really great contenders like Bruno and Kluivert for captaincy. And I think that makes it quite tricky for people to make moves, because I can totally understand why people want to rather just sidestep Haaland for this week. And I think that's totally fine and justifiable. So for anyone who actually wants to keep players like Salah in their team, players like Isak in their team, and sort of maintain that team value, I think that's totally fine as well. You're only really running the risk of what the Haaland captaincy could be like, I would say, when it comes to that Leicester match in Game Week 30. And for all intents and purposes, you're going to have someone like Salah at your disposal to combat that, and that's fine. So those are kind of my thoughts. I would like to just say that I clearly need a defender, so go to shop for a player who has decent clean sheet odds, but also just good attack and returns. Guardiola's probably my man in terms of how I'm set up for wildcard 31. In the midfield, Kluivert really just, I think, looking at his match logs over the course of the season, he's continued to build his importance within the team, and sort of his stock has clearly risen. And for that basis, I would love to move Kluivert into my team. I think it was a mistake, just looking purely at my own move for Dango many weeks ago, to have ignored Kluivert and to have gone for probably the lower effective ownership option at the expense of potential expected points, because I didn't really anticipate or really understand how fast Evan Nilsson would come back. But because of that, I have pretty much had to bite a bullet here, and I think very much so Kluivert's coming in for this week. I also like the idea that even if I bring in Kluivert and you have that sort of FA Cup schedule impact, where Bournemouth will be playing the FA Cup match versus Man City, then playing Ipswich, then playing another match, I believe it is West Ham, 3 games in 7 days coming out of the international break, there's a big chance that Kluivert could get benched, because we've seen him get benched before. But I suppose that he's also one of the players now where you can say he's being trusted by Irola to play increased minutes, to start more games consecutively. And I think I'd like to move into Kluivert and use Dango as a fallback option for Game Week 30. So those are kind of my thoughts. In defense, I'll actually be fielding this week players like Alisson Becker. No, I'm kidding. I'm just going to field Mark Flecken this week. I'm also going to be fielding Gabriel and Castagna, who both have home games. We're going to bring in Guardiola for Trent, which means that I do lose a little bit of transfer value on Trent, but it's very unlikely that I'll be keeping Trent for the rest of the season. So that's that. He'll just disappear on the wild card as well. In the midfield, though, I will be selling Salah and I will be going for Kluivert. The purpose of that is really to keep as much money as possible so that I can make an even more aggressive move in Game Week 30. So I will go for a midfield that has Kluivert, Palmer, Trossard, and Bumo. We're playing with a 4-man midfield here, allowing me to bench Dango and hopefully get some upside from him in Game Week 30 if at all possible. Like, let's say if the Bournemouth game goes towards 120 minutes versus Man City, you've got extra time. I mean, he kind of almost has to start, right, on Game Week 30 potentially. But there's also a pretty high chance that Dango could actually have featured for 70 minutes himself, if let's say Evan Nilsson comes off and they play extra time. So you never know. Evan Nilsson could start 3 games in a row. So we'll just monitor that situation as we go. In the front line, I'll be going with Haaland, João Pedro, and Beto, which means I also will be selling Isak. Now, that's a lot of value gone for Isak and Salah. I do think I'm in a position where I just don't see too many moves where I maintain Isak or I maintain Salah that I think really gives me the maximum amount of sort of expected points potential whilst getting the sizable amount of risk that I want. And so I think I'd like to have as good a team as possible in Game Week 29 to get a little bit of an advantage versus people who are non-free hitting, right? I still won't really compete too well versus the free hitters. I'm expected to probably be, I don't know, 5-6 expected points down versus most people on average that are free hitting. But I think a lot of people are going quite safe with this Game Week 29. And of course, it is just one game week, but the carry-on impact of bringing in players like Haaland just means that I have a stronger team for Game Week 30 as well, which I'm happy to do. And the same with going for Kluivert. So that's the plan. No Salah for Game Week 30. But with Isak, the interesting thing with my plan here is if I field this 3-4-3, I would ultimately have a bench that would be comprised of, Alisson, Dango, which is a good auto sub regardless in this game week, which most people won't have, Munoz, and of course Hall, who won't play. But the point really is that I'd have a lot of money in the bank after this, and I can make an aggressive move in Game Week 30. And hopefully the international break won't create too many surprises in terms of injuries, because I do think I'm quite thin on defense, but that should be a really strong defense in Game Week 30. The plan for me, though, is to actually bring in Isak in Game Week 30 and to replace Beto with him, where Beto actually, I believe, has Liverpool anyways, and Isak is just a great option that I can bring back ahead of the wildcard as well, but actually allowing me to have a trident of Palmer, Isak, and Haaland. Now, given Palmer's, of course, recent performances, I suppose it's not the most equal-looking trident. I suppose the Dragon meme is relevant here, but I think that's still a very strong team for Game Week 30, and that's the plan. As far as captaincy for this game week, when we go back to Game Week 29, the plan is to captain Haaland and to vice-captain Kluivert. As I said at the start of this video, when it came to the segment pertaining to some of the odds, some of the data, I think the market data looks really strong for Bournemouth. So Kluivert captaincy is wonderful if you're ignoring Haaland. I think Bruno captain is also very, very solid. I'm not much of a reverse fixtures or someone who looks at historical matchups, but I mean, he's absolutely destroyed Leicester a couple times this season. I believe even got the assist to the offside goal that Maguire scored in the FA Cup, which is totally irrelevant, but he's the main man for United. He's got a good match. Bruno is obviously someone that I would be quite sad to miss out on this week, but I think for the purposes of getting someone who I think in Kluivert is potentially better if he can play and start in Game Week 30, I'll take my chances with him. So that's kind of where we're at. Really solid team, I would say, for Game Week 29. Yes, of course, I'm taking on a lot of risk. Yes, of course, I don't have Salah for Game Week 30, but I'm happy to do that. And we'll see where we land at the end of the season. This is, as I said, not exactly the position where I want to be at Game Week 29 this season, but I've had, I think, I've experienced sharp falls. I've experienced sharp rises as well. I think last season I was on a very much yo-yo pace. I think if I was actually able to show how I moved in terms of Game Week 26 when I was, I think, 300 ranked in the world, dropping down to 15,000 and then moving back up to something like, let's say, I think top 450 in the world or something like that. A lot of that I don't think could have been predicted. Ultimately, sometimes things just go a certain way in FPL. It's very hard to sort of predict the future, but we do so to the best of our ability with a lot of the kind of data that we have available and just the use of third-party, I think, kind of information. And I'm happy to take those risks. And I took a lot of risks even when I took, let's say, a -12 last season. Not that that means I'm going to do well, but I'm just going to go for it. And that's the plan. here for Gameweek 29. I hope you guys have a wonderful week yourselves. For people who don't want to sell Salah, I think the simple reaction is you can go for players like Bruno instead. You can go for players like Kluivert. You can ignore Haaland, and it's totally fine. It's also okay to bring in Haaland as well and actually bring in some cheap midfielders like maybe additional Bournemouth midfielders, maybe even bring in a Nottingham Forest midfielder as well, and kind of forget that you need to really spend that sort of money for this game week, especially since you can bring Salah back. There are also nice moves that I think which include things like maybe you sell Isak instead and Salah, but actually bring back Salah as in much the same way that I'm bringing that Beto to Isak move on the table for Game Week 30, right? You can always do something like Mbumo back to Salah. Mbumo is a very expensive player who doesn't really have a good game week in Game Week 30, and he's someone that you can actually leverage a lot more value from, other than, let's say, you can't really move someone like Noneri to Salah so easily because of the price gap. So those kind of moves I think are quite interesting for managers right now, and it's all about, once again, a question of a little bit of risk and also how you balance the importance of one singular game week, where here clearly I don't have to lose that much transfer value, but I still see myself on most cases on my wild card losing the transfer value on Salah. And so I've been asking myself over the course of this week, what is the true impact of losing 0.4 to 0.5 million on Isak? And I tend to think, just looking at some of the theoretical drafts that I've created for wildcard 31, that it's not going to have a significant impact, but I could be wrong. And I do think that there's two ways to look at it. You either maximize the short term, know that your long term is going to be a little bit more impacted by less transfer value, as we have seen, or you do the opposite. You go for a little bit more of a measured approach. You think that the wildcard 31 is going to carry a lot more value with additional team value, and you wait for that to be the time to sort of make aggressive moves. And ultimately, I think both ways and approaches could work out in very different ways. As I've experienced many times in FPL, I don't think an overall team value necessarily bears out amazing results. Sometimes just having cheaper players that you're forced to owning can actually be really positive for a team. And so let's just see where we land. But that's it for me for Game Week 29.